Hello everybody. Now that our most recent video series, France by Bicycle, have all been loaded onto YouTube, ready for you to binge watch if you haven't already, we thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and do one last video dealing with some of the questions that have come up. People have asked, how do we pick our route, or how expensive was it, or how hard was it getting hotels, what were the people like? And I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and just do a video that would kind of cover off on some of those questions. So here goes. Here's just kind of a bunch of random facts about cycling through France and what we found in our trip last fall. Let's start with the whole route. The route was really conceived by looking for the flattest, easiest riding we could find. We figure, we're not really trying to kill it, trying to do a lot of hills. We did avoid the Alps, we did avoid the Pyrenees, we avoided the Massif Central, but we found a really great route all the way through France, kind of a really nice little curl that goes from Nevers at the top of the Loire all the way and around to near Lyon. And you could kind of think of it as being broken into 5 chunks. We started doing the Loire Valley, a small section of the Valais which follows the Atlantic coast, the Canal du Domer, or the Canal du Garonne, and the Canal du Midi, which connects the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. Then along the Mediterranean, and then finally up the Rhone Valley along the Via Rona. Overall, I think we did about 1,300 miles and probably something on the order of 21,000, 22,000 feet of gain, which is not a lot. But again, we really designed it to be along rivers and along canals. It was actually a comparatively leisurely ride. We were there for 2 months. I think in that 2 months, we spent about a little more than 7 weeks actually riding. And how we did it, we flew into Zurich. Julianna has a cousin there. If you've been watching the videos, you know Nadia and Nadia's husband Victor. They live in Zurich. So we flew into Zurich at the end of August, and we had maybe 5 days to put our bikes together. And then we took a train to Nevers at the beginning of the Loire. And Nadia and Victor joined us, and then we began the section of the Loire. And that probably took us, I would say, 2 weeks to follow the Loire all the way down to the Atlantic. Going slow, taking our time, but I recommend you guys do the same. This is such beautiful country to savor, so much good culture, so many beautiful towns, and so many great cities along the way. To just bang it out, well, that would be something too. You could get on a road bike and just cruise and have a beautiful time of it. But there is so much to see. So 2 weeks is what we took for that section. Then Victor and Nadia left to go back to work in Zurich. Julianna and I continued on. We followed the Valais along the Atlantic coast then for maybe another week. And then until we got to about Royan, until we got to the Garonne estuary. And then we went inland from there following the Canal du Domer. And that was probably a good couple of weeks as well, I would guess. And that took us to Sète on the Mediterranean. We took maybe 3 days following the Mediterranean coast, and then we got to Arles, and then up the Rhone we went, following the Via Rona to Lyon and a little bit beyond before we caught a train back to Zurich. The trains can sometimes be a bit more of a hassle than people sometimes suggest. I hear people say, oh yeah, when you're riding in Europe, you can just roll your bike onto a train and away you go, and you can skip that 100 miles where you really don't want to Moon. Oh, there's Moony. How you doing, Moon? There's your cameo. There you go. Okay. It is a little bit harder than that. These French trains typically, the train pulls in, you've got to find the bicycle car. It has a little bicycle logo on it. And then you roll your bike over there and you see that all the bike racks are taken. So you got to find another bicycle car. And then you finally find a place where you can get your bikes onto the train. And you got steep little stairs that climb up, and you got to get your panniers off. And when there's 4 of you, and trying to find a place where you can get 4 bikes onto racks and then all of our luggage while the train is sitting there waiting for you to load, it can be a little bit stressful. So count on about 3 to 5 minutes of stress, but you'll figure it out. Even sometimes where we couldn't find anywhere to put the bikes, we made it work. But it is a little tricky, and it's a little hard, and you have to be kind of prepared for that. You know, people actually ask about the food and wine and that kind of thing. And I mean, I've never been a big fan of French cuisine, I guess, but this trip completely opened my eyes to what an incredible experience eating in France can be. You can start with the cheese. I mean, the cheeses. Every morning, and sometimes actually for dessert, you get cheese, and they have like 1,000 to 1,600 different varieties in France. It's an amazing art form there in France. The bread, I mean, the French bread that you get every morning for breakfast, you know, warm, crunchy, fresh. Oh, it's just exquisite. Better than any French bread definitely I've ever had here in the States. And then the croissants. The croissants are flaky and buttery and exactly the way you want them. And you get them every morning, and you get as many as you want. And of course you're riding, so you can make it happen. You can work off those calories and just really enjoy it. I really like the chocolate croissants myself. That was kind of my favorite. You know, they have dishes like escargot. I've always thought escargot, like who would want to eat snails? I mean, the escargot, we tried it when we first got there and ordered it practically every dinner after that, you know, where it was available. The duck, they have duck a lot more than they have chicken. So, you know, where you might order chicken, here you would typically order duck. And it was incredible every time, just as good as it gets. You know, of course, the coffee is just amazing. Can't go wrong with French coffee. Always, always really good. And then the desserts are ridiculous. I mean, you just get these incredible, it is an art form. I mean, food is just an art form in France. And as you go from village to village and town to town, and you sample the different regions and the different ways that people prepare these foods, I mean, you're just going on a culinary tour. I don't know if you could find it anywhere else. Maybe in Italy, you could get that kind of thing. Now, the food wasn't always great. In the interior, the food was amazing. When you got to places like along the coast, in resort areas and touristed areas, then the quality of the food went way down. And, you know, typically the prices kind of went up. It's kind of what you expect, I guess. So where you're in a little bit more of the countryside and a little bit more in the remote areas, that's where you get the really, really good stuff. We were so glad that we spent so much of our time on routes that weren't really, you know, the highly touristed areas. But I just remember you're looking for a quick place to grab a lunch. You find some little nondescript place, some small little hole in the wall, and have one of the best meals of your entire life. Along those lines, when you're traveling through France, you get to drink the wine if that's your thing. I'm not a big wine drinker. At home, here in Colorado, here in the United States, I don't really tend to drink a lot of wine. But there we had a bottle every night. It was always a bottle of the local. You're riding through the countryside and you're seeing all these vineyards. And then at night you order dinner and you get a bottle of wine, and it's the local cuisine, and it's really just this kind of wonderful way to really taste the culture and get a different sense, literally, of the culture that you're riding through. If you were looking at a map of our route, it would look pretty similar to the map of the wine growing regions in France. We didn't hit Burgundy, but we did hit the Loire Valley and Bordeaux, and especially along the Rhone. We loved all these wines, the Sancerre and the Poulet du Fumé from the Loire, these white wines that so good. And the Bordeaux's are a red blend. And the Côte de Rhônes were just absolutely insane. So good and so full-bodied and just complex and amazing and not expensive. Could not recommend it more. It was just a huge part of the experience. But what are the French like? You know, what are the French people like? Because you hear stories and there's stereotypes about the French being kind of rude and aloof. We didn't find that to be true at all. Wherever we went, people welcomed us with open arms. They were extremely kind, very nice, very interesting, very willing to work hard at trying to speak a language that we could both understand, as we did. You know, we would use the French as much as we could. They would use the English as much as they could. And, you know, somehow we made it work. And And it was an incredible experience. We met some really, really excellent people along the way, and it was definitely one of the highlights of the whole trip, is meeting some of the locals and hearing their stories. And one of the questions we almost always get on these kinds of trips is, how much did it cost you? And we don't really do a very good job of going back over all the bills and the credit cards and all that kind of stuff to see how much we spent. I mean, it's, you know, it tends to be a lot. You're gone for 2 months and you're paying for every night. So we don't know how much it cost, but we can give you a bit of a guide for the kinds of places we stayed, the hotels and the inns and the Airbnbs that we stayed in. I'd say that we were probably averaging about $80 a night, probably a little bit less. Obviously in the cities it's more, and in the countryside it's probably a little less typically. But we found accommodations to be very plentiful, very easy to find. We used booking.com, and that usually got us a room. We'd book ahead, like maybe 3 hours ahead. We never had to book far out in advance. Very rarely did that ever bite us. I think once in Nantes, we had a hard time, both Julianna and myself and Nadia and Victor, getting a room in the same hotel because it was just booked up. And we had another night where we could not get a room other than this real shabby room. There weren't very many rooms at all available. It got us this room here at a seafood restaurant. All 4 of us in one room. The shower was tiny, filthy, drain didn't work, full of mosquitoes and full of bugs. But other than that, 2 o'clock would roll around, we'd start looking for a room, we'd find these really nice places. Nothing like a 5-star place, but they were very warm and they were very inviting and charming, and sometimes with really beautiful views, and sometimes, you know, right next to the town center and that kind of thing. So we did very, very well with that. Now, we were traveling in September and October. That's the off season. And so that could throw your plans off a little bit. If you're traveling in July or August, I would guess that you have to be a little bit more conscientious about getting those rooms beforehand. But we like having that flexibility. We like playing it by ear and just kind of going with the flow. But overall, I think you can plan on having nice accommodations for about $80 a night. But everyone's different, you know, everyone has different tastes. So, and then in terms of expenses, dining, for the price of going to Chili's, you can get some of the best meals that you've ever had. And that would include a bottle of the local wine. So for maybe $40, you know, maybe $60 typically. Wouldn't you say $40? Yeah, I'd say $40 would include a bottle of wine and a really, really great dinner. And some of the best wine you ever had too. But we found that dining was not expensive. And the tipping, of course, is included. You know, people typically don't tip there, or if they do, you know, when it's 39 euros, give them 40. We would give a 15, or when we'd give like a 20% tip, people would look at us like, what are you doing? Like, why are you giving us a 20% tip? It felt kind of frowned upon. So watch your tipping. Lunches were inexpensive as well. I mean, typically we would probably grab cheese and meat and bread and fruit and that kind of thing at a market. And then we would just make a little picnic along the way, or we would drop into little places sometimes. And breakfasts were included in the price of the hotel. And you always had these incredible buffets with croissants and chocolate croissants and French bread and all kinds of different cheeses and different kinds of meats. You'd have yogurt, you'd have eggs. It was a full meal, full of variety. You never walked away hungry, and you always had plenty of fuel in the tank for your ride for that day. So, you know, you can kind of do the math yourself. I mean, if you're looking at $80 a night, $100 a night, for hotels, 40 to 60 probably for dining. It's definitely less expensive than traveling in the United States. Of course, you have the flight to consider, but the expenses once you get to France, not a problem. France is very affordable. So people also ask about the weather, and we were there, like I say, in September and October. When we got there, I guess the end of August, along the Loire, yeah, we were dealing with some 90-degree temperatures. It was hot and humid. We're not used to that humidity coming from Colorado, but it was still very tolerable. and it was unseasonably hot for them. By the time we were halfway through the Loire, I'd say, the autumn temperatures kind of really came in, and we were dealing with 70-degree temperatures pretty much the rest of the time. Got some nice, cool, rainy days, got some kind of drizzly days, but we love that kind of stuff. And so the weather was great. The wind was kind of a problem. Coming down the Loire, we were going downhill towards the Atlantic on the Loire, and like I say, that was about 2 weeks. And we had probably headwinds the entire time. Sometimes they were fairly stiff. Nothing outrageous, but constant. And I've heard people say that they like riding from the Atlantic up, and actually going uphill, it's so flat you can barely tell. But that tailwind would really help you out a lot. We encountered some really brutal winds along the Atlantic.
Heading into the wind. God, this has been such a slog. I hate wind. Oh my God.
Those are just crosswinds, and it just depends on the direction that your trail is taking you. Typically they come from the west. And then when we came up the Rhone, we had the Mistrals, they call them, and they come from northern France and they push down towards the Mediterranean, and those were in our face. We took the counterclockwise route following our route, but if you were to take it clockwise, I think you would find that the winds would typically be at your back, and it probably would be a little bit more of an enjoyable ride. Tailwinds are usually going to be behind if you're going down the Rhone River, and if you're going up the Loire. It's not going to make much difference on the Atlantic, because those are going to be crosswinds coming from the west. And I always love that question because there's no way to answer it. Every day you had highlights that you would look back and say, wow, what an amazing day that was. That was incredible. So it was constant, and it was many. But I don't think either of us have a favorite. Like, we don't prefer the Loire to the canals, to the Rhone, to the Atlantic. And they were all very cool in their own different way. The things that stand out, I would say, on the Loire, Sancerre was a hill town that was very much worth the climb. The old town of Orléans, Angers, Amboise. Oh, the caves of Saumur, and these were troglodyte caves that are, just ancient, that people are still using. And then the trail takes you in this subterranean space beneath a medieval church complex with wine caves and all this kind of stuff. And the trail just goes down through and it's just crazy. It's so cool. The beaches along the Atlantic were really wonderful. And the harbor at La Rochelle, that was along the Atlantic coast. What a beautiful little town that was. And, kind of just felt like it was right out of Game of Thrones or something, just really magical. There was this promontory, kind of a citadel that was in a place called Talmont-sur-Garonne, I think. Oh my God, and we had no idea it was there, and we just kind of stumbled into it again. Some of these things you just stumble into, as that was fabulous. The wine tasting in Blaye, that was a great experience that we kind of stumbled into. The vineyards above Bordeaux were really, really outstanding. The plane trees that line the canals on both the Canal Garonne and the Canal du Midi. Such peaceful, dreamy riding. Carcassonne is a must-see, and that's right off of the Canal du Midi. The historic cities of Arles and Avignon, and the whole Via Rona was really an outstanding route. Took you through some great little places and over these old bridges, and then the energy of the bigger cities like Toulouse and Nantes and Lyon. And of course the people. The people were a real highlight. It just seemed like every day was another beautiful experience that was just unfolding and took you by surprise and took your breath away. Well, anyway, that's our wrap-up for our trip to France, and hopefully that answers any questions that y'all might have. Obviously, if you have any more, go ahead and drop a line, and we're happy to always engage. And if you would see to it to just subscribe. If you subscribe, and if you like, and if you share, YouTube will get this stuff out to more people. Our goal is to get more people out there off the couch and onto their bikes. Not just seeing the world, but really experiencing it, one pedal stroke at a time. So if you haven't seen the videos, start here with Sancerre and you can just kind of run through them. People call them binge-worthy. I think you'll find them very entertaining and very informative and a great way to spend an evening. Happy trails, everybody.
Bonjour.